my name is Chad Prodromos. I'm a board-certified orthopedic surgeon, sports medicine specialist, but my practice is also heavily involved with regenerative medicine. I was consulted on an outstanding young athlete in 2022, primarily because of some musculoskeletal shoulder problems, which is the kind of thing I deal with, but also he had some GI problems which sounded inflammatory and is an area in which we're also active. So he is sitting to my left. His name is Noah Norton, and I'll leave it to you to tell your saga. We're filming this because his story is remarkable, and we hope that hearing it may help others with similar problems.
Thank you. So, first off, thank you for having me. I'm happy to be here. But yeah, I mean, we started first talking, I remember on I think it was a FaceTime call in the emergency room. Not the best of places to start out a relationship, but I mean, it was a tough situation, and you really came in and were huge. It was initially just, as you said, for the shoulder, and it really branched out into so much more, and we were able to, kill two birds with one stone with the GI and the shoulder issues. But going back, I mean, it all kind of started, I had some musculoskeletal issues with my shoulder and stuff throughout golf, but that's not entirely uncommon being an athlete. And then I remember, as far as GI symptoms go, it didn't really start until I was actually vaccinated in my senior year of college in 21, and got it boosted as well in December of 21. But those symptoms were not too severe either. Both issues were, not anything that I couldn't play through or weren't crippling in any way, So, and then, fast forward to July of 22, I actually I got the infection. I got coronavirus, and actually the actual virus itself, I was fine. I remember joking with my parents. I'm like, it's nothing. Like, this is what we were worried about the whole time. And I started noticing about 2 months later in September. I had a big meal with my buddies, and I started to get really sick and started to have some bloating and nausea and started to really struggle to get food down for a couple of weeks. And I was about 200 pounds. I was a pretty fit individual, so I was like, you know what, I'm a little thick. I could lose a couple of pounds. That's not going to be a big deal. And I lost I think it was about 15 pounds, to be honest, and it wasn't anything crazy. And then I lost in November was when I really lost a significant amount of weight quickly. Those first 15, 20 pounds were in those first 4-6 weeks. And then it was in November, I actually woke up with just excruciating shoulder pain, and we didn't know why. I've always had a severe wing scapula in my left shoulder, and trainers and PTs over the years have always had something or ideas of how to fix it, but it's always been something that is just a strange one that not fixable, but never really affected golf. And then I woke up with that excruciating pain, and I wasn't able to really get food down on top of it. So I started losing weight very quickly. I think it was another 20 pounds over the course of I want to say less than 2 weeks. And that's when I went to the emergency room because I really couldn't get food down. The pain was so bad I couldn't sleep. So I spent, almost a week I was on saltine crackers of all things, because you grow up and when you're sick, you're eating saltine crackers, and water. And I was sleeping very little. I would pass out because I was so exhausted, but I'd wake up in more pain. And so I wasn't able to sleep more than about 20 minutes at a time. It got to where I was hallucinating, and I wasn't even talking. My roommate said I was just saying nonsense, and of course, at that time, I was in Atlanta where I went to school, and my parents were across the country, so they really had no idea what was going on. And my roommate had to take me to the emergency room, and that's when, my mom actually flew out to help me out, and that's when she called you. She got into contact with you, which was wonderful, and from there was kind of, a circus, because we jumped through so many hoops trying to figure out what it was, because it was a mystery illness. We started with a CT in the emergency room, contrast, no contrast. I think we did two MRIs that week. I think I actually remember the tally of MRIs by the end of it were crazy. It was double digits at minimum, and we started. I remember my mom has always been a nurse, and she's always believed in research and helping yourself. So I remember we started with doctors in the area trying to, diagnose the issue. But they were all wonderful people. I remember everybody had an idea and a theory to test, and the issue was it was so broad. There were so many. There was the shoulder. I had sciatica. I had stomach issues were the most concerning by far, but it was such a big thing to tackle, and so many different possibilities. We started with blood work. We saw, I think it was like so many doctors in the area. It was like 4 or 5. It started to feel like I was living in the waiting room, and I pair that always with I wasn't able to eat. I wasn't sleeping well. It's a very dark period, and that's why I always, when I talk to people who are in a similar situation, it's always difficult, because you have wonderful people around you often, and you often don't really realize that I always was a person who did stuff by myself, and I remember that was the first time I actually had to lean on people, and it was really touching. I had just such great friends for those people who were there for me. But no matter what you do in that situation, nobody actually knows what it is like to go through it, and it is tough, but you get hope over and over, and someone comes to you and they're like, I think it's this, if you take this is going to help, whatever it may be, and it doesn't work after 2 weeks, 4 weeks, 6 weeks, however long. And it becomes a trial and error period, which every time it feels like, 1 step forward, 2 steps back. And, why did I try that? Because it didn't work. And you start to spiral.
Yeah, so these were with the local doctors. And then at what point did you start to reach out elsewhere?
So we did about 3 months. 3 months of in the area. We started even before I was in the emergency room, because there was something off, but it really snowballed then. And about a month after the emergency room, we went to some big medical institutions and went through the whole process. We flew all over the U.S. to a bunch of different spots, and tried those that was another, actually about 5 months there. We went to multiple states. I went back to California, I went to the Midwest, I went all over, down south, and every time it was the same thing. Most often they would tell you, it's this. Oh, I've seen someone with the same thing. It's this. And you're hoping it is. And they definitely mean their best. But the issue is, it's tough. I mean, there's no real way to know when there's such broad symptoms. And so we tried so many things. Medications were the first things, because those are the first things suggested. But unfortunately, often with those, they come with their own batch of side effects, and you have to battle those. And so then you feel like you actually went backwards, because instead of actually getting better, you added more issues with it. And that in its own right is stressful, and it weighs on you. And I was lucky. I had my parents were with me the whole every step of the way, to shoulder that load. But it wasn't until we tried some I always call them low-hanging fruit, but it's really treatments that have no real side effects, but can only really help, and they're not going to mess you up in any way. So we started with supplements was the first things, and those things helped a little bit. They didn't fix the problem, but they definitely made life a little bit easier. And honestly, when you're at kind of it's probably not rock bottom because it can always be worse, but when you're at what feels like rock bottom, a little bit of an improvement is huge, and then that's progress, right? And then when you go from there, we would try something new. At least we were better than we were at our lowest, and I think at this time in the timeline, to go back to where we are chronologically, I mean, we went through the major medical institution process in December, January, February, and March. And we went through so many tests, MRIs, I know exactly what I look like underneath the skin.
Right. So this is early of 2023.
Yes.
And so I was consulting with Noah, and I looked in every way that I could think of to look for what was wrong with his shoulder, his trapezius. At some point he had a little sciatica. And honestly, it just wasn't anything that obeyed traditional orthopedic definitions of what happens. And my practice as a sports medicine doctor, it's heavily weighted toward knee and shoulder problems. So I'd done a lot of this and I just didn't know. So I would talk periodically to Noah, and he would try another medical center, both for the GI problems and also for the orthopedic problems. And I encouraged him to try every conventional thing and safe alternative thing to see where this was going. We do work with stem cell treatment for autoimmune and inflammatory disorders, and it was in my mind, but I really didn't want to go there until everything else had been exhausted, and hopefully he got better. So the chronology now is heading into 23. The other thing, though, Noah's humble, but tell people a little about your golf. So you were a collegiate golfer, you were very accomplished, and because this was a huge thing, you were really good at it, and you couldn't golf at all during this period. But I think it would just be of interest for people to understand the level that you had gotten to playing golf.
Yeah, up until everything that happened, golf was my whole life. I mean, I grew up in Northern California, kind of a smaller town in Chico, California, the north of Sacramento. And, golf isn't massive up there. It's still California, but, if you're in the Bay Area or LA, it's much bigger. And so I spent most of my younger life traveling down there to play competitively. And I had quite the junior career. When I graduated, I was the number one junior in my class. I think number two junior in the country or the world. I can't remember how the ranking systems were done now. I think it was the world. But so I had a good senior year, and I caught the eyes of Coach Hepler at Georgia Tech, and I always wanted to branch out and get out of California because I felt like most people always stay out on the West Coast. And so I went out east because Georgia Tech is one of the best programs there is, academic institution and strong academics. And I met some of the players there, who are all my closest friends now, are like brothers to me. The kind of the guys who held me up when I was down. I got to play with them, and we were a very good team. My first 3 years, we didn't leave the top 5 in the rankings. We were always 2 or 3, most commonly. And as for individual accolades, I mean, I started getting injured towards the end of my college career, but that was when we started seeing a lot of those neuromuscular issues. But leading up to that, I qualified for the U.S. Open in 2019. I won, the 2019 Patriot Amateur, and a handful of other things that I usually don't talk about, but played in a couple of Korn Ferry events and top 10 in my senior year of college. And so I was feeling very good about my abilities going into professional golf. And this all kind of hit like a truck actually during second stage of Q school. I was going there, I actually like tore we don't know if it was serratus or intercostal muscle on the left side. So there was a lot of bruising, took 4-6 weeks to come back from that. Then I tore my meniscus like back to back. And then I got sick about right after that. That led right up into the COVID issue. And so I kind of got just back to back to back hits. And it had been so long. I actually had kind of forgotten about golf. But then we honestly, the stuff that we did gave me a second chance. And now I'm remembering all of it. And the games come back and it's just a gift. But leading up to all this, I was never thought about anything. You don't ever think it's going to happen to you. But once it does, it really takes a second to adjust. I mean, I still was hanging out with all my friends are professional golfers, so still watching those guys do it every day. I mean, that's you're rooting for them, but in its own right it's kind of like you're sitting watching from a window at the life you were hoping for. But,
right, and so this chronology, so the vaccine was 21, and then all through 22, and now we were talking into 23 and going to medical centers. And so it's a long time to not be able to do what you love, and really getting no traction. And again, I was consulting, and I didn't really know either, except that with all the things that were going on, his GI symptoms, for no obvious cause, and the musculoskeletal symptoms, we were discussing. I said, this just has to be some sort of an inflammatory problem, most likely related to COVID. And we have had, with long COVID, a variety of unusual symptoms. The commonest one is fatigue, but I had actually a physician who got hypertension from it. We've had other GI symptoms, other things. So I said, I don't know for sure, but it would appear that it's on that path. So then going late into 23, the other thing is that I was looking at my notes, there was his weight. So he had been 200, and then he was 180, and then he was 160, and just slowly sort of dwindling. And so, fast forward to late 23, things just weren't getting better. The issue of trying hyperbaric oxygen came up, which I encouraged him to do because it couldn't hurt, safe, might help, and he tried that. And then why don't you pick it up from there?
Yeah, so I think it was June of 23 when we discussed that, and that's when I started. That's when I dropped to 135, so we were at about 65 pounds of weight loss, which was a lot. But we did hyperbarics kind of as a Hail Mary. I remember before we did it, I wasn't familiar with it, and I just remember you saying that it wasn't going to hurt, and that was the first time we had really gone down that alley other than supplements as far as treatments go. And I started to get better about, I remember, 2 weeks in, and my calorie count was always about 1,000 max at its best, and I got up to about 2,800 was at its best during the hyperbarics. We did hyperbarics from June all the way through August, and I think it was something like, if I remember right, I think it was 60 sessions or 40 sessions. It was 20 it was only one ATA or atmospheric pressure, and then 20 more sessions we did at 2.2, which is the max. And I drastically improved. I could work out again, which honestly was a huge hurdle because I was always an active guy, and that's such a huge part of the mental part is being able to do things. And, you're taught to be a fighter as an athlete, and when you get down, you fight and you work and you come back. And the problem with illness is if I fought or if I tried something, I would just be worse off because I'd be more tired, wouldn't be able to get out of bed or whatever it was. So this was the first time I found a sign that I could fight and I could do something actively. So um, I remember hyperbarics were so exciting for me. I was telling everybody about them because it was first when I first started to see improvements. But fast forward to the end of August, we stopped for a bit to see if it was permanent, and because we knew that sometimes they can be temporary, and sure enough, about towards the end of September, I think it was again, so about a year after the initial start of symptoms, that's when I started to digress, to get worse again. And I got up to about 159 pounds. I remember it because I was so excited. I was so close to 160. And I dropped very quickly again. And that's when, that's when it hit hard. It's hardest because there was a little bit of hope. And I dropped quickly again. And I ended up dropping, I think my lowest weight I weighed in at was fast forward to last January, 126 pounds.
Right, and we were talking, and I was excited that it helped, but knowing that there was a good chance that it would be temporary, but thought maybe it won't be temporary. But then clearly it was, and then we were talking, and then his weight. This is a 70+ pound weight loss. And we were talking, and his weight got down there. He was having trouble drinking water at all. And to the point we were worried about it. I remember I was telling him, I said, just drink a shot glass of water every hour, 30 cc's, just enough to keep your kidneys going. And it was to the point where it was dangerous. And so we talked, and I said, I can't obviously guarantee that it's going to help, but mesenchymal stem cells, which is what we use, and it's long story that I won't get into now, but they're stem cells isolated from Morton's jelly that we get from a lab whose cells have been approved by the FDA for use in certain cases. So they have a perfect record of safety. They're infused IV. There's no rejection. We know that they're completely safe, and they have potent anti-inflammatory properties. They work for various autoimmune disorders, and I was pretty much convinced that this had to be autoimmune from the COVID. So at this point, we discussed, and I said, why don't you just go down? We do it in the island nation of Antigua. We do some treatment in the United States with FDA approval, but we only have approval for certain things. But it's easy and it's safe, and I was really worried about him. Getting to the point where you're this thin and you can't drink, about this potentially being life-threatening. So we talked, and I said, you can go down to Antigua. We've got an excellent team there. You just get plugged into an IV, get the cells. They're stored there in liquid nitrogen. It's completely safe. We monitor it. I go down at intervals with people, but I wasn't going down right then, and I didn't know how much time he had to wait. So we discussed this, talked to Noah, talked to his family, and then decided to pull the trigger, and I'll let you take it from there.
Everything really evolved so quickly. Going back to my actual symptoms with everything after the hyperbarics, and honestly in the beginning, they were all very similar. It was I had mostly just gas, bloating. At its worst, it was, I was vomiting, had vertigo, but the issue was I would have such upper stomach pain that I wouldn't be able to sleep until it went away. So often I was up very late, 5, 6 a.m. waiting for the actual digestive process to work to get it through. And, we were told it was some form of gastroparesis. We did a gastric emptying test and it was delayed, but nothing so severe that they didn't really give anything to fix it. We tried medications, but nothing actually helped. So most of the times we were just dealing with a significant amount of bloating. So we tried, Gas X or all these different over-the-counter methods, and little bit of help, but not much. And so that's really what led to a lot of the weight loss was I wouldn't be able to eat because I'd be faced with that digestive delay. And if I tried to push food down, it would just not stay down. So we were faced with a lot of that. And, fast forward to when we talked, we were in contact a lot after the hyperbarics. And I remember we were trying to figure out the best way to go about it because it's a big process. That's why we went through everything we went through the last year to make sure it wasn't something else that we were missing. And we did every test imaginable. And so then we moved forward with that, I remember. And I think we did my last CT in November and ran a couple more tests to rule out everything else. And I dropped to 126. I was in Washington with another gentleman who was helping us out, and he was running some tests. And I remember that was first time I actually passed out. And I'd never done that before. Luckily, my mom was with me, and she's had done it before, nurse and everything. So, and that was when we started to really get concerned because my actual diet at that time was a cup of rice a day. So 200 calories, which obviously is not enough to live off of. We made it about 3 weeks on that diet before it was, DEFCON 5. I remember the water issue was terrible. I don't know why I couldn't get water down. Nobody can explain that one. I would get a little bit, but I couldn't get it down. It would just be immediate bloating or I would basically just come out the other way. So that's when we talked to you on the phone, and I think that was beginning of January. And we were looking at doing a plasma exchange potentially. And, the other option was if that didn't work, we were going to do like a intravenous feeding, like through a tube to the heart because could not get anything down. And I remember that was in its own right a little bit terrifying because I don't like stuff inside me. And that, of course, that's the thing that freaked me out the most, let alone the actual threatening situation I was in. But, I was unable to get out of bed for about, I think that was my longest stretch. Just no energy, no actual ability to do it. And that's when we talked to you on the phone, and you basically had told us, like, that was the first time I actually had a doctor just say, look, I don't know if this is going to work, but I know that it won't hurt. And at this situation, you need to do something. And I remember that being an oddly refreshing moment for me because all I had heard for about a year and a half at that point was, this is gonna help. This is gonna go away. This is temporary. And at that time, when you're in the moment, you're not thinking you're clearest, but you're convinced that's it, right? And just to hear the truth finally, instead of people honestly always trying to help, which they do mean their best, but it's so tough. You're in such a dark mindset that nothing's going to help. And we talked on the phone, I remember, and we flew down to Antigua, which honestly, it was the biggest hurdle was just being able to travel. Because I remember when we got there, it was so easy to just go around the island. We had a nice place on the water. I remember how pretty that was. And it's all like a fever dream because I probably wasn't in my best head state. But I remember when they stuck the needle in, they couldn't get it in the vein because the vein was moving all around and the arm was so small. But I think we sat in there. I don't remember the exact count or anything, but how many I got. But we sat in there for about 4 hours, and I remember periodically they would step out and you'd be on the phone and you were constantly checking in, which honestly was huge because I didn't know what I was doing. It was an absolute Hail Mary at the moment because we just had no clue what the future was going to look like. And after, there was no actual issues during it, other than, needle bruising, like normal, a little bit of a headache, which I forget what the name for that was, but that was completely normal. We took a little Tylenol, which I was so worried wasn't going to go down, but it went fine. And we did an IV as well, which was actually huge because I was so dehydrated. And which I actually should have mentioned in the first place. I had to do IVs constantly. That was how I actually stayed hydrated. We were doing constant IVs once a week because I couldn't get water down in the stomach. So I probably should have mentioned that during the process. But afterwards, I wasn't sleeping right. So I remember I got sick really bad that night, but I had gotten sick every night, right? And so it wasn't an abnormal. I just laid the pillows up like I normally do, and I have to sit up straight. So I didn't sleep laying down for a year and a half. So I had to sleep sitting up. And I remember I was so sick, but I was so exhausted. I was sleeping as I was sick. So, I mean, like literally don't remember any of it, but most of the time I was always awake. You couldn't sleep through it because it was so bad. But this one, you were so tired. I slept for 17 hours. We got up, my mom woke me up, dragged me into the airplane because I was still sleeping because I fell asleep at 7. I woke up at like 11 to get on the flight. So, or 16 hours. So, and so we got on the flight home. I was still snacking at that point, not really eating, just like a little bit of rice here and there. And I think the first time I actually got food down was like, I think it was a shot of this little like oat milk or something, like 3 days later. And then we, tried oatmeal and rice was a big thing, and really just the basic foods.
How about water? Because as I mentioned, as you said, I was calling frequently. I was worried about it. The clinic down there is great doctors and nurses, so I knew he would get great care. But the idea, as you were saying, about getting hyperalimentation, it's called, I mean, that is something that's an end of life kind of thing. And so not being able to get water. So, so I was kind of wondering, and we talked sometime, that night, the next day, and I was saying, well, how about water?
So the progression of food is obviously hugely important. At that point, my biggest concern was water because, if you can't take water, you can't survive. And it's interesting, you mentioned sleeping a long time. It's characteristic of stem cells, actually, that people usually sleep like a baby and sleep better, which is restorative. But anyway, so on the next day, I know we talked, and I was wondering, were you able to tolerate water even a little, which prior to that you hadn't hardly at all?
So the water difficulty that was the first thing that got better. It took about, honestly, I think it was 2 days. It was very quickly for the water. When we got back, we started, shot glass. Then it was, like an ounce at a time, basically. And then once there was like no issue, about a week in, then honestly, the water intake became very normal very quickly. I honestly stopped thinking about because the food was such a big mountain in my eyes, because it was first get any food down, then it was what food I could get down. And there's so many different options, everything's so processed, so you can't eat too much of that. So we had to start low FODMAP foods. And the mom being the nurse, I've mentioned it a couple times, she's the real MVP of this because, all I had to do was just get up and eat the food. She was doing as much research as myself, and she did so much for me in finding what I could do and help prep the food. Because a lot of the times, in the beginning, when I was at my sickest, I couldn't do it myself. But as I was starting to able to do it, she was showing me how to do it. And because a lot of this is it's a life-changing process, and it won't ever go back to how it was before, which is honestly in my eyes a good thing, because I'll always be healthier than I was. I was, the kid who was eating Chick-fil-A for breakfast every morning and eating whatever I wanted. And now I look back and, the the veil's been pulled back on what's in all that stuff, and how you really probably should stay away from those things. And now the diet has become so like a science, and it really started right after that, because we had to be so systematic with what we introduce and how little. I think it was a shot glass of different types of milk, soy milk, oat milk. It was never dairy, but then we went into oatmeal and rice and all these different very easy to digest foods. And until we were up to I think it was about 2,000 calories, I remember, that was a huge threshold to get to, because that's normal. But once we got there, it actually kind of plateaued for a second. And I was so terrified, because we had talked about sometimes it can be temporary, anything can be temporary. Like, we talked about, you've had people come in and they hadn't needed a second treatment, and we were wondering if that was going to be, we had actually called you and we had talked about the second treatment, and that was always an option. We were going to try 2 more things first, and it was a probiotic yogurt, so just to add more gut bacteria, because what really happened was, with losing all that weight, with not being able to eat food and being so sick, my microbiome in my stomach was just absolutely terrorized. And so it was unable to come back on its own. And so we had to rebuild it. And so when we added those foods, that was kind of the last piece of the puzzle. So my microbiome was absolutely torn apart. So when we introduced more the probiotic yogurt, I think it was about 2 months after, which I believe is when it kind of typically peaks. So, or the stem cells typically have its most potent effect. And so it was probably both of the two things put together, but it just took off like a rocket from there. So I was at 2,000 calories and 50 grams of protein a day. And I was about 143 pounds, so I was up almost 20 pounds. And from there, it skyrocketed. I remember we tried one thing before the yogurt, and I actually had a little bit of effect, a reaction, because it caused a little bit of air in the stomach. And I remember panicking and literally thinking, like, this was in my mind our last shot, which of course it's not, but I was so nervous. And once we got the probiotic yogurt and I started getting better, it got better so fast. I was up to, it was eating 4,000 calories by like less than a month later. I think I started the probiotic in the beginning of May. And by the end of May, start of June, I was already up 15 pounds. So I was almost 160, which was my best during hyperbaric. And I was at 180 grams of protein, which is the max I need, right? That's what the weight I wanted. So they told me that was that's what you should aim for. So I'd already met that target, and I was at the max amount of food I want to eat, because then I can gain the weight without, putting on too much unnecessary weight. And, and then I started working out, and everything got better so fast to where over the next 2 months, I got up to, where I am now, which is about 180 to 185 pounds. And I actually like that weight a lot better than I was, because, I was a big boy, and which is great and all, but the weight that I'm at now is much cleaner, and I'm able to swing. I'm able to practice, work out. I have no limits physically, which is amazing. There were no actual neurotic, nerve, musculoskeletal issues coming back, which could have been all of it, could have been some of it. I don't know exactly how that actually shook out, but I have none of that. I'm able to play, practice with very minimal limitations, and it's been like a second life, because when you're in it, I kind of let go of the game because I didn't know what that was going to look like. And, I always hoped I had a chance because I spent so much time doing it, and I was lucky. I was born with a gift, and I wanted to see how far that gift would get me. And so I had kind of given up on that for a little bit because I just didn't know if it was possible. And then about May, that was when I started believing again. And now I'm able to compete, and play with my buddies. And my actual game is back. I'm competing with the guys who are playing every week. And so now I kind of have to start from scratch, but I'll start from anywhere. I'm excited. I get to play a couple mini tours coming up in about a month, which will be almost 3 years since I last played. And, I just can't wait. It's going to be so much fun. So I get to practice every day and give it one more shot. I know it's hard to make it. It is from the bottom. Usually when you come out of college, you get to start from a spot. But, tell you what, when you come from where you were, it always creates a little bit of perspective for you. So
I see. So you tried the probiotics before, but you couldn't keep it down, whatever.
exactly. So the
But
probiotics before stem cell,
Yeah.
no go.
But then after the stem cell, yeah.
Exactly.
Yeah, and I want to bring up too, like the concert of the two, and then I want to ask you about the musculoskeletal stuff. But hearing you retell the story, it's just worth pointing out that it's very important. A patient who's engaged, who does their own research, who does their own things, is huge. And the stem cells are the way your body helps heal itself, and they're best used in conjunction with what your body is doing. So it's not like a magic bullet and you just keep taking it. My hope had been to just do one and not have to do it again. And as you said, we discussed doing it again, but then you were trying things, like you mentioned you were doing probiotics, which was huge on your part, your mother's part. You tried them before when you couldn't eat and they hadn't worked, but now that you could keep some things down, you added them and they helped you to take off. So my hope was that it could be one and done. And if we had to do it again, we would have. And thanks to your input, at least so far, it's been that way. The other thing that too, maybe you could review. The thing that was really interesting to me about all this was clearly there was a correlation with the gut issues and how you got better, but the musculoskeletal issues, and you can describe this, I know, got dramatically better, which to me just clearly says that it pretty much had to be an inflammatory neuritis, maybe an inflammatory bursitis, but that and we see long COVID and the COVID vaccine also can cause your body to get inflamed. So the gut things in your case were life-threatening, but I think that this autoimmune syndrome was acting on multiple organ systems. And so I was, of course, very happy that your gut was better and you could live. But then we were talking more recently, and the fact that the other things got better too, I think is sort of equally remarkable. But maybe you can embellish on that.
As far as the actual process by which, it was funny to watch them both get better because they both got better at different paces. In the beginning, the musculoskeletal issues went away first because I had I had some nerve pain down my legs, a lot of sciatica related symptoms and shoulder pain, but I always, which I'm learning as time goes on, isn't always the case. I always thought it was something to do with the significant weight loss, which it doesn't have anything to do with. It's just how whatever I had was affecting me. And that went away quickest. And then second, what came was, my energy levels. I was able to go to the gym, do normal things. That came, then I was able to eat. And that's when
Was it water first and then musculoskeletal?
so it was probably water. The musculoskeletal stuff came back probably in a month. That pain went away. So I was able to walk. And I remember the first time I walked about just around my first block, and then I was able to walk around the block twice, and then it was just a constant increase. And I remember that was the first thing, was being able to do activity, and then honestly that also helps be able to digest more food. So then the food came with it, and then I wasn't able to, after a while my physical fitness kind of plateaued because I couldn't gain much weight with the 2,000 calories kind of tabled off. So I was still small, but I was fit. And then once I was able to start eating a lot of food, then my fitness flew up again, and I was able to start actually lifting and building muscle mass, and go from there to where I was able to start swinging again, which was in late summer. And that was when, because most of the nerve stuff I always noticed during golf, because that is such a it's such a rapid movement, 120 miles per hour with a driver, or 100 miles with a 5-iron or whatever it is. It's a fast movement on the body. So your nerves, they react. They're the first things to really be sensitive to something like that. And in the beginning, I was really hypersensitive about it, and which is often with coming back from any injuries. And as time went on, it kind of just disappeared, and I've had no nerve symptoms in the slightest. Everything has been, it's cliche to say too good to be true, but it is. It's been wonderful just to be able to not have to worry about any of those serious issues. The only thing that is still not back to normal is I still don't exactly trust the food I do eat. So I'm still very, very careful, and every piece of food I eat is quantified, kept track of, and I know how many calories I eat, what I'm eating, where it's processed and bought from. So I'm not actually getting any potential stuff that I don't know about. And that way I know if I do have a reaction, it's either A, B, or C. I can pinpoint where it was. So that's kind of been how I've approached it since, and it's been almost seamless so far. So it's been wonderful.
And I want to mention, it's interesting. I'm just hearing you talk. The thing, so getting your gut working so you can take water is big. The musculoskeletal, I didn't actually realize it went away that quickly. It's just the inflammation stops, and probably
really went away quick.
And then with your gut, like you said, and with all the great work you were doing, your gut just has to kind of rebuild itself. Fascinating story. And talking about the chronology, it all kind of makes sense with regard to water being the first thing, because that's the easiest thing for your gut to handle. The food taking longer because your gut had to rebuild itself, with your being proactive doing it. The musculoskeletal, again, just an inflammatory, I think, neuritis, bursitis, and once your immune system stopped attacking you, that it kind of got better. So, to be at the point that you are now, and just getting after it. I think you said you were going to play a tournament, and your only restriction you described is that you're careful with what you eat, which is not a bad thing. And you had said that you had interest in, or had already achieved, in the professional level. How does that work, or what are your next goals in that regard?
So as far as the future with golf, I'm starting from the bottom, but how it works is you have the PGA, then you have the Tour below with the Korn Ferry, and you have Q School to qualify for the Korn Ferry, and then you also have a tour below the Korn Ferry, which is called the Americas Tour, and you qualify for that. So I can sign up for those Q schools, the qualifying schools, for each of the Americas or the Korn Ferry, which is what ultimately I will do. But in the meantime, the Q school for the actual Korn Ferry, which is the big one every year, is in the fall. There's 4 stages. It used to be, I think it's September through December. So that's the ultimate goal. But in the meantime, my big focus will be playing mostly mini tours, just getting as many reps as possible. You can still, win a little bit of money here and there, but the main thing will be just getting meaningful reps under competition. I'll try to, qualify for the U.S. Open. I haven't tried since 21, so it's been a while, but, I've been close. I think I missed it by one twice and made it once, so, maybe I can sneak in that way, but I kind of have to start at the bottom of the totem pole because it's made to help guys who are in college who are big names to make it out there quicker. And if you're going to start as a middle-aged, I guess I'm still young, but for golf, you're kind of middle-aged once you reach 25, is you have to start at the very bottom. You have to start at, pre-qualifying or first stage like everybody else, and you got to earn it. So I'll start from there and, just play and enjoy it and enjoy being able to chase it one more time.
So thanks for telling your story. Not an easy thing to do. And we, as we discussed, we respect our patients' privacy. We deal with a lot of high-profile professional athletes, whatnot, and we don't talk about it at all. And I said to you, we don't have to do this. I think it might be helpful. And you, to your credit, said, if hearing the story can maybe help somebody else, I want to do it. So thanks for doing that. You tell the story well. Also a great example, just how you fight your way through golf. You fought your way through this, of how this should be a partnership between a physician and a patient. So I think what you've done is inspiring to me. I mean, I watched you suffer over period of time going back and forth, but you never gave up. So I think that's fantastic. Your family too. Your folks are great. I talk to them all the time. Yeah. Anyway, good luck. I'm sure things one way or another will go well. And thanks again for telling your story.
Yeah. Again, thank you so much for having me. I mean, I am so grateful for everything you've done for me, and my parents absolutely are as grateful as I, if not more so. And I've been just lucky in the process to have so many great people on my team, yourself included. And as you said, if there is someone out there who is going through this and is wondering if it gets better, I mean, it really does. You just have to keep moving forward because there are great people out there who are looking to help. And this man to my right is one of those. So I wish you guys all the best, and thank you for having me.